I was in Norwalk in Monroe County, probably the smallest parade I've ever done, maybe 4 blocks and maybe 100 people. I probably shook hands with every single one of them, but you do permits to close down streets and work with local officials to do that. You don't let people take over streets in those type of circumstances, because then we have a lawless society. And it is the local officials that failed Madison. They failed the police department in not supporting them. And what I can promise everybody in Wisconsin as Attorney General, that will not happen on my watch.
What do you got for me? Yeah, what do you got for me? Baby, would you stand and fight?
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Speakeasy Conversations. For those of you who haven't been here before, the Speakeasy is my little basement bar here in my home in Holman, Wisconsin. So we called it the Speakeasy because that just makes it a lot more fun. My guest tonight is Eric Toney, but before we go talk to him, I do want to remind you, you can head over to cooleyconservatives.com. I would very much appreciate your tips over there. You can click the little buy me a coffee button because it takes a lot of coffee to keep this operation running, folks. There's a lot of work to be done, and it's just a one-man show, and it takes a lot of coffee. So if you want to leave any tips over there, click the buy me a coffee. I truly appreciate all your generosity. All right, Mr. Eric Toney, thank you again for making the time. I know you are super busy out there running around the state trying to get elected to become our next Attorney General. Tell my audience a little bit about yourself, your background, what I call the origin story. What kind of led you into this life of service?
Yeah, well, it's great to be with you, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about the Attorney General's race, why it's so important for us here in Wisconsin. And, for me, I was born and raised in Fond du Lac. It's where my family still lives. I live in actually the town of Fond du Lac now, and I grew up in a law enforcement family. My dad was a police officer with our sheriff's office here in Fond du Lac and retired as a patrol sergeant back in 2013. And then my mom worked at my grandfather's small business. He had started a healthcare company, kind of like the American dream. He had never had a college degree, was served in the Marines for a little bit, and then just started a healthcare company where he sold, wheelchairs, lift chairs, crutches, you name it, anything under the sun that people might need, from oxygen to anything. And my mom worked there. And so I had, really hardworking parents and was blessed with just an amazing family growing up in Fond du Lac. And ultimately, my career kind of took me to law school, which I wasn't sure if I would necessarily do that or not. But before doing that, I ran cross country and track at St. Norbert and just had a wonderful time with the competition and some great teammates. And after law school, I ended up finding my way back home to Fond du Lac, which I wasn't sure that would happen, but I was in private practice for about 2.5 years. I did criminal defense, mental health, juvenile law, and it just started a bit of a bankruptcy practice before I got elected district attorney when I was 28 years old, and now in my 14th year as the Fond du Lac County district attorney, where nice. I love what I do as a district attorney, where I was born and raised, getting to help keep my community, my family, and friends safe, and working hand in hand with our law enforcement to do that. It's just an incredible feeling to do that and help get justice for victims. And I really love what I get to do, but unfortunately I've had to handle some really significant cases, from cold case, racketeering, other homicides, domestic violence, drunk driving, you name the case. I've probably personally prosecuted it, sexual assaults, even human trafficking. We've had some illegal immigrants that have committed some horrific crimes in our community that we've sent to prison in the last year or so, from attempted homicide, sexual assault, and human trafficking. So we've seen some of those consequences. And then the overdoses, and fentanyl has been especially devastating, not just here in Fond du Lac County, but across the country. And we've just seen the consequences of those that don't treat the border with the seriousness that it needs, with fentanyl, methamphetamine, and other drugs that pour into our community. And so that's been, unfortunately, I've sat across from too many moms and dads that have buried their child from those overdoses. And we've been
heartbreaking.
It is. They're some of the more difficult conversations that we have with families because you can be the best parent in the world and do everything right and give your child all the opportunities. But fentanyl doesn't discriminate based on your age, your gender, how much money you have, what your skin color is, where you live. It's devastating to families across the state. And so it's one of those, small moments where we can get some justice for those families to hold someone accountable that delivered that poison that killed their child, because all too many families go without that justice because of how difficult those cases can be to investigate and prosecute. And while doing that as a district attorney, we've built some really great relationships with our law enforcement. And then I served as the president of our District Attorneys Association, which is a nonpartisan group that we have to essentially do the budget negotiations for prosecutors for the entire state. And when you're the president, you help lead that effort. And so, in 2023, when I was the president, we have to negotiate with a Democrat governor and a Republican legislature. And we were incredibly successful in getting a massive public safety investment across Wisconsin for public defenders and prosecutors that have allowed us to actually start to be able to hire some of these positions, because we weren't able to do that before. But we know there's more work to go, and especially in some of our rural areas where it can be really difficult, not just to hire prosecutors, but find attorneys, doctors, nurses, and other professionals. And so we're continuing to work through that to help make sure that our rural communities are also getting the resources they need to protect their community. And one of the things that I did, not just getting resources for prosecutors, I actually reached across the aisle and helped our Democrat Attorney General get additional crime lab resources in that budget, and making sure that we're putting public safety over politics. And we even in our most recent budget, we got about 50, 60, I think, prosecutors that were added across Wisconsin to literally help every corner of our state and helping law enforcement take dangerous criminals off our streets. And so I've been really focused on delivering public safety results, not just here in Fond du Lac County, but for the entire state. And I was really honored when I was named our 2024 Wisconsin District Attorney of the Year for the work I've done in the courtroom with our team and the great attorneys and staff that I have in my office. We never get those awards on our own. It's all because of the great team and the law enforcement that I get to work with. And the Wisconsin Law Journal gave me an award as an unsung hero for that budget work, where they said we helped end a constitutional crisis. And that's what I've always been doing, is trying to put public safety over politics and make sure that we're protecting people across Wisconsin. And so it's been just a wonderful career for me, and the difference that we get to make, and the special opportunity it is to be a district attorney.
Man, that's awesome. And I love the way you put that too, putting public safety over politics. It's interesting that you say it that way, because I was able to talk to David Varnum yesterday. He was here for the Cornfest parade in Holman. And there's so many of the Republican candidates who are running that trend. I have seen it again and again. It's not about the politics. It's not about the ego trip or whatever, it's about really doing the right thing. And regardless of the politics, as you said, I mean, the idea of getting some bipartisan work behind this stuff to get justice for some of these people. God bless you for that, man.
It's one of those things when we're trying to get justice for families and protect our community, politics don't matter.
Right
and
on.
as district as district attorneys, we have to make difficult decisions. And people will sometimes ask me, what your job must be really difficult. And don't get me wrong, there are challenges to being a district attorney across the state with the crushing workloads that our prosecutors experience and the heavy weight that's on their shoulders to find that justice for families. But when we make decisions, the decisions are often, it may sound odd for people to hear, but easy to make, because we're doing the right thing. We're following the facts in the law. And then sometimes the biggest challenge is actually communicating that decision if people might disagree, or even if they agree with it, but making sure that they understand why we've made those decisions. And that is so critical in the area of public safety, that we have leaders that are making those decisions for the right reasons and willing to communicate to the public and not hide from it. And, I ran for Attorney General back in 2022 when we got within just about 1%, 35,000 votes out of 2.6 million of winning that race. But we got outspent 5-1. And it was such an honor to travel across the state and see literally every corner of Wisconsin and meet so many wonderful people. And I had so many folks encouraging me and frankly imploring me to run again. And I wasn't sure that that was something that I wanted to do. And I had a really clarifying experience for me going back to 2023. I was 39 years old. I had run, I mentioned earlier, cross country and track in college at St. Norbert. I've done 7 marathons since college and still like to run just a lot slower than I used to be. I'm not setting any personal records anymore, but I just love to run. And so I was in a relatively decent shape. And I started not feeling well in 2023, and I really couldn't figure out why. And I ended up having over the 4th of July that year, had to go into the hospital and learned I had myocarditis and was there for about a day and a half, got released and felt great after I got out, did a homicide trial with some others in my office a few weeks later. And we got a great result for a family to get some justice for them. And then in August, I was walking in my office and I all of a sudden felt my right ankle getting rubbery. And it was just the most strange feeling I've ever had. And then all of a sudden I lost control of my legs and I collapsed. And I couldn't move them. And I was starting to like shout to my office for help because I could feel that odd feeling kind of moving up my body. And I didn't know if it would affect my voice. And within, I'd say, I'm guessing here, maybe 20 seconds, that feeling went away and I could move again. And I got up and I did the not so smart thing. And I went over to my desk and I started working. And yeah. And I like to share this story because it's important for people to think about. So what I ended up doing was thinking about one of my former colleagues, Dennis Krieger. He was my deputy district attorney, and he passed away unexpectedly from a cardiac issue. And I later learned, complained to somebody that he thought he had a chest cold early in the week. And then on a Saturday, he passed away. And so I was thinking about Dennis, and that inspired me to try to figure out what was wrong with me. And it took months to finally figure it out. And I'm very fortunate that I did, because I finally, in the very beginning of November, I got in to see my primary care doctor, and he heard a heart murmur. So they had some more testing done. And then that was a Friday. The Saturday, they told me that I had a positive blood culture. And I didn't know what that meant at the time, but it means that you have bacteria in your blood. And that's not a good thing, and you need antibiotics to get rid of that. It was especially bad for me because when I was in the hospital in July, I learned that I was born with a defective heart valve. It was a bicuspid valve, meaning I had 2 leaflets and most people have 3. And the reason that's important is because if you have that defective valve, bacteria can get into your heart valve more easily. And if it does, and it's not addressed soon enough, it will destroy your valve. And that's exactly what happened to me. My aortic valve was destroyed. And so then I was inpatient in the hospital on Sunday. And then the next day on Monday, they did some more tests. And then my doctor came in and said, you need open heart surgery. And basically, we're going to try and do this by next week, Wednesday, because my aortic valve was completely gone.
Goodness.
What they told me was people usually live for hours with a valve that's in that, destroyed. And I was alive easily over a week. And that's just, through the grace of God and being in great shape, that my heart was strong and able to continue to fight through that. And so what I was doing leading into the surgery, and I think it's what a lot of us would do when you go through a serious surgery like this, I reflected on my life. And some of the things I was just sharing about being a district attorney, getting to keep my community safe, my family, my friends, where my dad served as a police officer. My grandpa started a small business. I love what I get to do. And I didn't have regret. I wasn't wishing I had done something else with my life or had a different career. I truly love helping keep people safe and fighting for justice. And it just gave me this amazing sense of peace and calm going into that surgery, that I knew I had lived a life that mattered. I didn't have regret, and I was trusting God through the hands of that great medical team. And I knew that if that surgery went well, I would want to run for attorney general again, take some of the great things we've done as a team in our office with our law enforcement through our DA's association, and take that to our Department of Justice to have an attorney general that's going to be focused on public safety and not the politics that we're unfortunately seeing there. And I'm really happy to say the surgery went incredibly well. I was back to work part-time in about 2 weeks, and I ran a 5K 6 weeks afterwards and did a
Oh
murder
my
trial
goodness.
8 weeks afterwards. And so, and I like to share this story because I think it helps people understand what drives me and what I want to do and why at our Department of Justice. But on top of that, it's also so important for people to pay attention to their symptoms. Don't ignore them. Don't just say,
Yeah.
"Oh, I'm getting older." As my doctor told me, getting older isn't the diagnosis. I mean, it's certainly, we can see more things happen to us, but pay attention to your health. Make sure you're there for your loved ones. Make sure you're there for your family, and get yourself checked out and go to the doctor like I did, because you're too important not to be here.
Yeah. Wow. That's incredible, sir. I love the way you put that too. I mean, there's so many different messages inside of that. The idea of just don't tough it out, just be smart, get the exams and make sure that you're good to go. That's important. I know my wife yells at me all the time. I don't go to the doctor enough. I'm getting to the age too where I should probably do it a little bit more frequently, but Gen X, we're just going to tough it out, rub dirt on it kind of a thing.
Well,
But I
and
do
there's
that. That is a good point.
there's a lot of truth to that. And that's why I like to talk about this story too, because there are people that are like you. I was kind of like that. I just, I went back to my desk and started working.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where when I saw my doctor at one of the follow-up visits, he told me that, and one of the things I did afterwards is I wanted to raise some awareness, because if people could see, somebody that's not even 40 years old in good shape, that this could happen to me, it can happen to anybody.
Yeah.
And so we did some newspaper stories, TV, radio, and just talked about my experience and encouraging other people to get help. And so through all the media we did, my doctor told me that he had this was within probably like 6 months or so of the surgery. At least 5 people came to him saying they saw that story. And it was like 2 or 3 of them, he had to prescribe some medication to them, or they probably would have been dead within about 10 years.
Oh my.
And it's just one of those things where when we talk about some of the challenges that we go through, it can help other people be there for their loved ones. And so it's something that I like to talk about to help others hopefully get some help if they may not know that they're even experiencing something.
Yeah, that is such a great thought too. And actually, I mean, I've got a couple of other podcasts I've done with friends about substance abuse, other things like that, just to help, like you're saying, get awareness out that people don't have to handle these things alone anymore. There's all kinds of ways they can get help, and especially on a medical thing like this. I mean, the technology these days is incredible. So we can probably get things fixed up pretty fast. But I love to hear that story. Thank you so much. Great origin story. And your purpose. You found your purpose in life, my friend. God bless you for doing what you do with the law enforcement and everything.
What's really interesting too, though, is I get people that will come up to me. It could be strangers or people that I know, and they tell me about the medical challenges that they're going through or that a loved one is going through. And just every day when we go about our daily life, there are so many people that we probably don't even know that are struggling with something significant, either themselves or somebody close by. And it's just, having some grace for those that we come in contact with.
Yeah, well said. And that whole idea too of that, I mean, we might be that one little, angel that God put in someone's life to help them out. It's just, you never know how you might help somebody. Even a smile, holding the door, all kinds of ways that we, and that's the thing I love the most about living in the Midwest. We're just all such great people. We're all so nice and kind to each other.
Especially here in Wisconsin. I've, during this campaign, just this past week, I've now visited all 72 counties, and it just is so important to me. If you want to represent Wisconsin, you should see all of Wisconsin and be there and listen to people and hear how, whether it's our Department of Justice or other areas, what they need to be safe in their communities and have public safety work for them. And it's just been wonderful traveling across all of Wisconsin to learn what we need from our Department of Justice and understand all across Wisconsin.
Yeah, and I mean, there's definitely a lot of really great things going on in this state. There's also some challenges that we need to address. And I know I've heard you speak about this before, and you actually did a really great video down in Madison about it. But one of the things that concerns me when I saw the kind of riots that took place a few weeks ago in Madison, it bothers me to see the kind of lawlessness that Madison is willing to put up with. And I know, like, from here in La Crosse County, I just shake my head when I saw that video of the police chief who just surrendered his podium to the rioters. And I mean, why not enforce the law? There's got to be disorderly conduct right there. No one elected those rioters to speak on behalf of the chief of police. So thank you for going down there and taking the video that you did. Actually, I think I'm going to share my screen here just so people can see. You had posted this on Facebook. Let me get it shared here. And you just kind of talk through, what was this experience like on the ground there going through Madison during that riot?
We went there in an early afternoon on a Saturday. It was raining, so we decided, well, let's take a look for ourselves. And so I just had one other person on my campaign team. We didn't have any security, just walking around, seeing how the intersection was completely blocked. EMS, other vehicles couldn't make it through. You think about the impact on a business owner or their employees or the residents that live in that area and how their lives were disrupted. And it didn't have to be that way, because we had one of the candidates for governor condemn this officer without the facts as the investigation was just getting off the ground.
She came out and called it execution. That was so irresponsible.
It was, and we see the consequences when elected officials like her and others say those type of things. And we saw it in the wake of the Jacob Blake shooting in Kenosha, where Governor Evers condemned and convicted the officer without the facts, putting out false information. And then we saw Kenosha burn. We saw the loss of life and the destruction to property and people's lives impacted in such profound and negative ways. And we have an attorney general in both of these circumstances that sat on the sidelines and didn't stand up and let people know in Jacob Blake that no, what the governor said is not true. There's more information. Stay calm. Let us do our job. Let us investigate this. We'll be transparent with the public and protect the integrity of the investigation. But he wouldn't do it because he wouldn't push back and was too weak to stand up to his own political party, putting his partisan politics over public safety. And now with this Madison situation, with that shooting, we saw him once again put his own partisan politics over public safety, refusing to speak out against his leading candidate for governor, to be a leader, to make sure that we're protecting people in their homes and their businesses and not allowing people to take over an intersection because of what their opinion might be. And people have the right to protest, and we have to protect that, but that doesn't give them the right to take over an intersection. You know, just on Friday night, for example, I was in Norwalk in Monroe County, probably the smallest parade I've ever done, maybe 4 blocks and maybe 100 people. I probably shook hands with every single one of them, but you do permits to close down streets and work with local officials to do that. You don't let people take over streets in those type of circumstances, because then we have a lawless society. And it is the local officials that failed Madison. They failed the police department in not supporting them. And what I can promise everybody in Wisconsin as Attorney General, that will not happen on my watch, because we have the tools to make sure this doesn't happen. We can work with the governor or the chambers of the legislature to authorize the Attorney General to prosecute crime in certain parts of Wisconsin or circumstances with that legislative or gubernatorial approval. We would then work with the governor's office, with the state patrol, the DCI, law enforcement agency under our Department of Justice, and local law enforcement to declare that an unlawful assembly and order people to disperse and leave. And then if they don't, they can be arrested, they can be prosecuted, and they can be held accountable for the impact they're having on those businesses, those employees, and the residents in those areas. If they want to protest, they can. They just don't get to take over an intersection. And we cannot allow that type of mentality to take over in Wisconsin, to have another Kenosha. We saw what happened in Madison in 2020 on State Street and other parts of the city, and what we saw in the Twin Cities. We cannot allow that to happen in Wisconsin. And as Attorney General, I will stand up for the residents and members of our community to ensure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, God bless you, sir. I know it. I mean, speaking of the Twin Cities, it's not that far from here. And so we're always worried about that kind of overflow coming from Madison, coming from Minneapolis. I mean, that kind of lawlessness is one of the things that keeps me up at night. And it related to that kind of lawlessness is something that on this podcast and a weekly recap that I do pretty frequently, I try to keep an eye on crime in our region. And one of the things I've been seeing this trend again and again and again, where judges and prosecutors let these thugs back onto the streets over and over again. I think it's signature bonds might be the term that I keep seeing a lot of. Other things like just giving people probation and then they end up hurting someone else again. what are good ways to hold more of these prosecutors and judges accountable for their judgments? One idea that I was thinking of, and correct me if I'm completely off the mark here, but what if we adjust the definition of accessory so that a judge, who lets somebody out on the streets, if that person hurts another person within a certain amount of time, the judge could be held as an accessory because they let them out. Is that going too far? What's the best way to handle these situations?
Well, one thing that's important for us to all remember is when people commit crime, they make those decisions. It's not people in the criminal justice system that are making or committing that crime. It's the individual that's going on that crime spree and continuing to commit crime. And so we have tools in Wisconsin right now on cash bail to protect our community and make sure that defendants are showing up to court. And unfortunately, some judges don't use the cash bail tools that are available to them. When a prosecutor walks into court, they can ask for, a $10 million cash bond, and the judge is the one that ultimately makes that decision. And so judges are the ones that have the authority to order cash bond, a signature bond, or what the amount of cash would be. And they can also order what are called non-monetary conditions. So they could say, you have to, stay in your home, or you can't possess this, or you can't have contact with that person, those type of conditions. And we do see some judges in our state that are not using the cash bond tools that are available to them. And we see some of these criminals that are out on the streets committing new crimes. And one of the things we're going to work to do at the Department of Justice is work with the U.S. Attorney's Office to effectively have our assistant attorney generals deputized so that we can prosecute some of that violent crime in federal court in coordination with local law enforcement and local district attorneys to ensure that we don't have some of these violent criminals roaming our streets while we wait for these cases to move forward. If we have judges that aren't using those tools, that we can look at the federal resources and through our Department of Justice to help do that. We've seen it done in other states like Virginia and Missouri to some really strong success. And that's a partnership that we can do here in Wisconsin as well in coordination with our local law enforcement and prosecutors. But, when we see that example of what you've talked about with some of these defendants that don't have cash bail, we're seeing a massive public safety failure from our attorney general with the broken promises. He's been in office for almost 8 years now, and he's made promises on forensic testing. And it's almost hard to believe, but he has taken on average over twice as long to test less DNA despite having more analysts and better technology.
And better technology, exactly.
Yes. And he said that he was going to make it faster, but he's taking on average over twice as long to test less DNA. And here's the wild part. He goes around and blames the legislature, saying it's their fault for not giving him more resources. And he's not taking responsibility. He's made these promises. Back in 2019, he actually said he thought he had enough DNA analysts, and he's testing less than his predecessor. But he's still taking on average over twice as long as his predecessor. And we're starting to find out why, because we saw a nonpartisan audit of our crime labs, and it was released in 2024. And he had less DNA analysts filled compared to 2020. And the crime lab positions that I mentioned I helped him get in the state budget, over a year later, he didn't even fill those positions. So he's going out there saying that it's the legislature's fault, passing the buck, when he's not even using all the resources that they've provided him. Yeah. And frankly, he's lying to Wisconsin. He's lying to the public. And if I had somebody like that as a police officer, they'd be on our Brady list, and we wouldn't feel comfortable with them being able to testify in court because what they're saying is simply not true based on what they've said before and what the facts are. And the consequence to this for Wisconsin is not good. We have some of these victims that are having justice delayed because they're waiting for these cases to move forward. And as they say, justice delayed is justice denied. And then we have some of these defendants, to the very point you made, that are out on the streets. And some of them are committing new crimes with new victims, while that other victim is still waiting for justice because we have an attorney general that's put his partisan politics over public safety and is breaking promise after promise. And there's a reason that I have a bipartisan support from over half of our sheriffs across Wisconsin. It's Republicans, it's Democrats, it's independents that want an attorney general that they can partner with to keep our communities safe and fix the broken crime lab situation that we have, because it's not the analysts. We have amazing analysts at our crime labs. I've had had them testify in cases and worked with them, and they do amazing work in helping protect our communities. It's the failed leadership from our attorney general, and we need to start changing that on day one in January of 2027 with new leadership at our Department of Justice, and that starts on November 3rd.
Yeah, well said, sir. And I'll just take it to the next level too. This idea of like you're saying, the judgment in how he is allocating resources now. How many lawsuits does he have against Trump, the Trump administration right now? How does that help anybody in the state of Wisconsin?
It's hard to keep track because it seems like it's a lawsuit a week. And here's the interesting part. And I think this is, some might consider it inside baseball, but it's an important distinction. Let's say somebody gets into a car crash and they hire someone to sue the other person for some damages. Their attorney's doing the work, doing the paperwork, filing it, right? Well, Josh Call, when he's involved in these lawsuits, isn't that attorney that's actually filing the lawsuit and doing the legal work. He's doing what's called joining these lawsuits. And so that means some other liberal attorney general in another state in the country, their office has done the legal work. And then all Josh Call is doing is signing his name to the bottom of it. But he's still spending a tremendous amount of resources to decide, is he going to sign his name, and spending tax dollars to do that. And it's just another broken promise, because when he ran for attorney general, he said that the office was too political then. And now he's put that on steroids. And when someone's joining these lawsuits, the overwhelming majority of them would continue whether he filed that lawsuit or not. And so his campaign is focused on signing his name to someone else's work, that whether he had signed it or not would continue forward with or without him. And we're seeing the consequences with the public safety in Wisconsin and the failure to do the forensic testing at our crime labs, with it taking over twice as long to test less DNA, other forensic evidence categories that are taking longer. I mean, earlier this year at the State of the Tribes address, tribal leader came out and said Josh Call had eliminated drug investigators for northern Wisconsin and that it was unnecessarily costing lives. And I stood in Eau Claire in 2022 and said that he was reducing these DCI agent resources. And now we're starting to see the consequences of that, with people continuing to die from drug overdoses, an attorney general that's failed to take that issue seriously, because he'll talk about, and it's an area that needed to be addressed with the pharmaceutical manufacturers, but he's ignored half of the problem and a bigger portion of the problem that we're seeing right now. And that's the illicit and illegal fentanyl coming across the border and here into Wisconsin. And it's not something that he talks about because it doesn't fit his partisan politics and left-wing agenda that he's been driving. And that's where, when I talked about before, we need an attorney general that's going to be willing to communicate and be honest with the public about what's going on in these public safety issues. And he's shown time after time, broken promise after broken promise, that he's unwilling to do that, and unless it fits his left-wing narrative. I mean, here's how wild it is. Earlier this year, I think it was June, he was asked about some of the dangerous public safety comments that some within his own party have made running for governor, with Francesca Hong, that wanted to abolish police and prisons, if he was concerned about that. And he couldn't stand up and condemn that and say how dangerous and wrong that is, because he didn't want to push back and was too weak to stand up to his own party. That within a few weeks of that, he actually spoke as a keynote speaker at a conference for a group that wants to abolish prisons. And we need an attorney general that's actually going to be serious about making public safety the number one priority over politics, not the number one talking point that it's unfortunately become for our attorney general.
That is very well said. I'm glad you put it that way too, because it reminds me of something. One of the reasons why I'm so proud to be part of the Republican Party in this state is that we do tell each other when we're wrong. We hold each other accountable. We do a pretty good job of that, as you, I'm sure, are very aware. So it really saddens me to see that the other side will just go along to get along with everything. It's all about power to them, and it just sickens me.
Well, one of the things, and I tell people this all the time, as your attorney general, I will make decisions you will not agree with, but it's because I'm following the facts and the law. And if I disagree with the decision I've had to make, I will work with the legislature and the governor to try to change the law so that it better fits the values of what we're looking for here in Wisconsin. And we have an attorney general right now. I mean, frankly, he's more interested, you ask about some of these lawsuits, he's fighting for transgender surgery for kids right now in a couple of them. And you compare that to, he could have been involved in a lawsuit in West Virginia to protect women's sports. He wouldn't sign his name to that. We've
Yeah.
got a situation going on in New Richmond, Wisconsin, where they've got a biological boy into I think it's a girl's bathroom, that he's not standing up and fighting to protect women and girls' private spaces, bathrooms, and sports. And as an attorney general, I can promise everybody I will be standing up to protect women and girls, their spaces, their bathrooms, locker rooms, and sports. And we need an attorney general that's willing to do that.
Yeah. Well, and thank you, sir. Thank you for bringing that up too, because again, coming back to this whole theme of the entire election season, and I think Tom Tiffany is the one who started calling it. This is common sense versus crazy, and thankfully, the common sense is all around us. That we have great candidates like you who are willing to not only fight for common sense, but also actual justice in our state. So thank you so much. I know we've only got a couple of minutes before you have to run. What is the best way for my audience to reach out if they want to learn more from you or help out your campaign?
Yeah. Well, number one, you can go to erictoney.com. You can get all of our social media links on there as well, and follow us on social media, which is always a great help. But one of the things we need everybody to do across Wisconsin, whether the polling says people are up, down, or tied, it doesn't matter. And I think we just saw in that Democrat gubernatorial primary, polling isn't always accurate because it's all about turnout. And so what we need everybody doing between now and November 3rd, talking to your friends, your family, colleagues, other like-minded people, and asking them, what's your plan to vote on November 3rd? Because we know some of our best voters are in some of these rural areas, and we've got great voters all across Wisconsin, but we're seeing greater turnout sometimes in northern, central, western Wisconsin. But when they don't live in a city, it's harder for them to vote compared to somebody that may drive by their polling place on the way to the grocery store, or they can go early vote at their city clerk's office. And for someone that lives in a township, they don't have that ability. And so that's where we need to make sure they're thinking about what's their plan to vote. Do they need to try and find their early voting window, schedule an appointment with their clerk, get an absentee ballot to make sure that they get it in if they're going to be on vacation, out of town for work, or just not able to get to their polling place? Because we've got such amazing voters all across Wisconsin. We've just got to find ways to make sure that they've got a plan to vote, that they know election day is November 3rd, because don't take it for granted that somebody knows we've got an election coming up, because some people are busy raising their family. They're busy working 2 jobs to get by. I mean, we know people are struggling with some of those affordability issues. And, one thing, to say about that, we've got an attorney general, that 400-year property tax increase. You don't get to hold Toney Evers accountable on the ballot for it on November 3rd, but you do get to hold Josh Kaul accountable for it, because he fought all the way to the Wisconsin Supreme Court to make sure that you had a 400-year property tax when he could have been the voice of reason, fighting against it, giving the legal framework to the Wisconsin Supreme Court to say this is unconstitutional, this is wrong, we can't be raising people's taxes for 400 years. Instead, he fought to put it in place. And so when you're thinking about what your property tax bill looks like, we can have an attorney general that's going to stand for you, not someone like Josh Kaul, who once again failed and was too weak to stand up to the left-wing radicals.
Yeah, well said. Well, sir, thank you so much for your time here today. Thanks for letting us get to know you a little bit better and understanding your crime fighting ways that are going. Man, I'm telling you, it's so exciting to see people who are serious about law and order, because here in La Crosse County, it's going in the opposite direction. And to have someone like you in charge of the state, maybe we can see some of that trickle its way down here and have some corrections. Again, thank you for your time this evening, and safe travels as you're going around the state in your campaign.
Well, I appreciate it. I will say we've got great district attorneys across Wisconsin, and some of them, we don't agree all the time on how they handle different things, but I respect all of our DAs that are willing to stand up and take these jobs, because we've had some of these DAs offices where we wait months and months for somebody to even apply to take on one of these jobs because of the challenges that they face. And so I may not agree with my colleagues in every decision they make, but I respect the fact that they're willing to step up and serve. And I certainly have an approach that I like to do. And as Attorney General, we'll certainly be a leader in public safety here in Wisconsin and helping keep our families and communities safe.
Great. Thank you, sir.
Yep. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I want you.